Path of Exile 2 has a host of classes to choose from. I'm going to deep dive into each class as much as possible. We'll cover all the details like their attributes, their abilities, how many they have. Additionally, I'll cover the Ascendancy classes for each and what those are going to be looking like. Last up, we'll even cover some of the lore tied with them, where this guide should help you choose and pick which one you want and why. What's up world, it's Utopia back here with another video. Today we're checking out all things Path of Exile 2. Now we'll jump into the classes, but before we do so, I need to break down the class overviews, what we're going to be starting with, all that there. So first up, there is 6 classes for early access. That's going to consist of Monk, Sorceress, Mercenary, Ranger, Witch, and Warrior. Now with those classes, they also have Ascendancy classes tied to each. Each class will have 3 Ascendancy classes. This is going to be tied to a Trials mechanic. However, there's only going to be 2 of those at early access launch. Now there will be 2 ways to actually get through these classes or to level them up, which there are currently 2 trials to do so, and there will be a 3rd one after early access. There's going to be one in Act 2 called Trial of Secamus, and then there will be one in Act 3 called Trial of Chaos God. Those are both the different trials that you'll be able to level up your Ascendancy classes within. Each Ascendancy class will take 3 points to level up a passive. Most classes will have to choose between 12 and 16 passive skills that will be within each tree, which also do contain a potent notable skill that is gated by a generic lesser node. So it actually does take 2 additional points there to reach them. Now you will actually start with some skill passives. Some will start with 2 and some will start with 1. That just depends on the Ascendancy class itself. And just like the normal skill trees, you will be able to refund 1 Ascendancy skill point. However, that's going to require 5 regular refund points. If you do reset your skill tree all the way using all of those regular refund points, you can actually change your Ascendancy class using the Labyrinth Treasure Room, and you can do so in any difficulty. Now that we got that all the way in the classes overview, we'll break them down one by one. So jumping right into it, the first one here we have is Monk. Now Monk does have dash-like combat, or dash combat style. You see they are very fluid in their movements. In total, the Monk class will have 21 active skills and abilities, which they primarily will use with a quarterstaff. However, they can also go unarmed, so there is a mix and match there. They will have access to Ice, Lightning, and Wind, where they can then combo those skills. They also have some really cool mechanics here, kind of akin to a totem, but not really, where they can drop a bell down, and every time they hit it or ring it, that will do some area effect damage. So they will have placement abilities that do not move. Now the main attribute that Monk uses is Dexterity and Int, so you will need to combine those to get the most out of Monk. Moving on, we do have their Ascendancy classes here. First up here is the Invoker. Now that one is in tune with their elements, or they're basically playing into the elements. They will have higher melee crits, and they can even meditate for a 2x energy shield, which they can also further spec into cold or lightning. So essentially this Ascendancy class will output more ability damage. If you're looking for some more defense, then you might want to choose the other Ascendancy class. That is the Acolyte of Chayula. That will spec into something called Darkness Spirit, which will replace your normal spirit, where you can then absorb and deal damage with that, or at least with that resource overall. You can also increase your resistances to chaos damage, and you have instant mana leech. You will also have the ability on downing enemies to gain life, mana, and damage from dropped resources. So this one will mostly play on you being able to pick up stuff off the ground to increase that, but also play into that resistances. Now Monk and the rest of these classes do have a little bit of lore tied to them, where for Monk they do represent a path of spiritual discipline and martial mastery. They're also known to be tied to traditional of balancing the physical and metaphysical to overcome challenges. Next up we have the Warrior class. Something very interesting with this class, you can specifically dodge cancel abilities. The reason why you might need to do so is the Warrior is a very slow melee class. However, it does hit very hard when those attacks are charged. Another thing to note with Warrior, obviously it uses very heavy armor, so it is very high in defense there. It has a broad range set of abilities as well, even though it is just a warrior, where you have slams, war cries, fire, and shield skill. If you aren't aware, war cries are normally buffs, and in this game as well. Now it does have both the mace and the hammer option, although with PoE 2 it looks like it's mostly pertaining to the mace. Now again, I did mention that it has a shield as well. Those can be unequipped and equipped. However, if you do have one equipped, you can block all attacks, including spells from the front. So even elemental abilities, those can be blocked with that. However, there is a note there that some enemies that are in red specifically, or when they do a red charge attack, those are unblockable, so you will take the full force there. Also, the shield doesn't just block damage permanently, it does have a stamina and stance mechanic. So essentially, if you do get hit enough and you hit 100% on your stance meter in the bottom left, then your stance will be broken and that will make you vulnerable to all incoming damage. Another thing to note here is that shields have separate skills. Another thing really cool here and notable with Warrior is that they do have totems. Much like a shaman in World of Warcraft, you can place these totems to either do damage or provide buffs. Now, Warrior does have a total of 20 active skills for maces. That doesn't include the shield skills. Their main attribute is, of course, just strength, so you will only need to focus on one with this. Now, Warrior is actually known to be much more of a difficulty class, where it is a little bit decently advanced. However, it is not as complex as some. Now, with that, Warrior does have 2 Ascendancy classes, that being the first one here, Warbringer, which is totem focused and can also summon spirits. They do have a protective barrier or a protective coating that will help against damage. Another notable thing here is that you can also spec into something where it provides no more Warcry cooldown, so you can spam those to your heart's content. If you are a buffer person, that's probably what you want to go with. Next up, they do have Titan. Now, Titan will provide higher damage and bigger hits and crits overall. It also allows you to get easier stuns, and those stuns can then provide higher damage, as you can spec into higher damage with those stuns. So if you want to overall higher damage, Warrior potentially, Titan would probably be your pick. If you want something that provides more buffs and has more totem mechanics, which also has some summon stuff, then I would go with Warbringer. For the ending lore section here, Warrior is known for being a seasoned fighter, often portrayed as a veteran of many battles. They're of course tied to themes of honor, survival, and brute strength. Next up here we do have the Ranger class. Now this one is a bow focused, of course. Another huge notable thing here is that you can shoot while moving, so you don't have to actually do any stance stuff. You can move around while shooting your bow. They also have one of the most amount of elemental types here, where they can go into lightning, ice, poison, and physical, which do provide a total amount of 21 different bow skills. Ranger has some pretty cool stuff. They are pretty agile with things like jumping arrow attacks. They also have a really cool and neat mechanic called a skill shot. Now, if you charge this up, you can then release it, but you must do it at the correct timing. That will get you a guaranteed crit and also provide AoE damage. So if you're wanting to do skill shots there, you definitely can. They also have specific gems that give them an additional mechanic there, which do provide a new poison mechanic, where you are constantly building up poison on enemies. And when you do build that up more and more, eventually hitting 100%, you can do a big AoE damage. Now, you don't need to hit 100%, but that will provide the biggest amount of AoE damage, so you can use that on command. Of course, the Ranger's main attribute is dexterity only. Now, the Ranger, as far as we know, is known for being beginner-friendly, although with those other mechanics there and the skill shots, that might be more advanced eventually. We also do have their Ascendancy classes here, where first up they have Deadeye. Now, because PoE is gender-locked with different classes, this is considered a markswoman. This can grant you extra projectiles. You can also spec into increased mobility. There's also a really cool mechanic here for no accuracy penalties, and it doesn't miss. So you could potentially save yourself some skill points by not specking into accuracy. However, they do also have a very competitive Ascendancy class called Pathfinder. That is the master of flasks and poison, where they can actually turn their flasks into throwables with various elements. They're known for spreading debuffs a lot easier as well. And while the other one provides mobility in general, this one provides more mobility while firing. So a little bit of a give and take there. For a little bit of their lore, they're known as a skilled hunter and a protector of nature. They're also typically depicted as someone who thrives in the wilderness, respecting and defending it. Next up here we have Mercenary. Now, they are known for carrying crossbows and also grenades, but their main hand is a crossbow. However, with the crossbow, they do have different ammo types. So they do have a broad range of elements here: lightning, fire, ice, wind, and physical. They can even turn their crossbow into shotguns, sniper rifles, assault rifles, and even grenade launchers. They also have different ammunition they can use. On top of the elemental types, they have the high velocity and even armor piercing rounds, so they can even swap out that as well. They also have some cool summonables. However, for their case, it is artillery turrets. Now, those do not move, kind of like the warrior totems. They're going to have a total of 22 active skills. And of course, their main attribute here is strength and dexterity. From what we know so far, the Mercenary is probably going to be a little bit more complex. As usual with other classes, they do have 2 ascendancies. The first one here being a Witch Hunter. Now, this one does provide some damage mitigation and an elemental barrier. However, there is a downside: you will take more damage against physical attacks. There's also something you can spec into where enemies have a 10% chance to explode on downs. And they have a really crazy mechanic here where you can get an insanely lucky hit with your initial attack that can do 30% damage instantly to any enemy, including bosses. Like, it will legitimately take 30% of a boss's health instantaneously. Now again, it is a very lucky hit, so this is dependent on that mechanic. Another cool thing here is you can debuff and slow enemy casts, so really against the elementals here. Their other ascendancy class is the Gambling Legionnaire. That will provide 3 extra skill slots. You'll also gain some extra maximum resistances, so a little bit more defense to all elements there. And you can use any gem without the attribute. So even if you don't meet the attribute requirement, you can still use that gem. And you'll also get higher quality skill gems. That is at a 12% rate. For a little bit of the starting lore here, they're known as a practical battle-hardened fighter with a background as a soldier or independent warrior. They're known for their survival instincts, resourcefulness, and they're likely tied to conflict-ridden environments. Next up here we have the Witch. This is much like a necromancer in a lot of other games, which of course they can summon. Not only just one summon, but many summons. They also do have their own casting stuff, which are powerful chaos spells. For their main hand here, they do have a wand. However, they can also get a secondary weapon called a scepter that will allow you to raise a larger army. They deal a special type of damage that isn't like anyone else, which is in the occult and noxious skills. They also have specialty minions, curses, and even sacrificial magic. One thing really cool with the Witch is that the minions will revive automatically. So an absolute huge mechanic for the Necromancer Witch class. Those that do revive automatically are the permanent minions that you can get with a certain amount of spirits. Now there is a spirit allocation system that determines how many of each minion type that you have, and the permanent minions come with special abilities called command skills. However, with those permanent minions, you can also raise corpses to have even more minions. Now those are the ones that aren't going to be revived automatically. Now the Witch itself doesn't mean that you don't have any abilities or things that you can cast yourself. In fact, they can spread disease and even do ability damage. That is with their chaos spells. They also have an insane amount, 25 active occult skills, and their main attribute is intelligence. From what we know so far, the Witch will be beginner friendly. However, their ascendancy classes might introduce some difficulty, where first up here they have the Infernalist. You can summon a Hellhound companion, which will then swap your mana for a new flame mechanic. When you do build that up, instead of it being mana, it will be a build up mechanic. Once you reach 30%, that will ignite enemies. However, you gotta keep this lower than 100%. You will do some things to alleviate that mechanically. If you do reach 100%, you will take damage. There's also a really cool mechanic here, a demon transformation, where you can take the form of a demon. You will take increased damage in this form though, but you'll have a much higher cast speed and your damage output will increase. Their other ascendancy class also does provide some of these mechanics here, but in a different way, which is called Blood Mage. Now they are the master of life and energy. Their skills will cost both life and mana. However, every monster they do down, those will drop a life resource. You can then pick that up to gain more life, and you'll have an increased life overall. There's also some spell leeching in there, that way you can keep retaining life, and this specific ascendancy will have higher crits than Infernalist. The Witch is known as a figure of dark magic, and they are often shunned or feared for their connection to forbidden practices, where they do have a dangerous pursuit of power. Last up here we do have our second magic class, that is the Sorceress. Now their main hand is a staff, so not a quarter staff much like Monk. Of course they are a classic spellcaster. They'll deal with fire, ice, and lightning, so they don't have wind or poison, that is for the other classes. However, with fire, ice, and lightning, they can actually combo those spells together. And another neat mechanic, you can auto-swap your staff, which you can allocate passives to different sets of different staffs. So that way, if you have a staff that provides lightning damage, you can then spec lightning passives to it, which obviously will increase your damage when you do cast that. Or when you cast any lightning ability, it will auto-swap to that staff. Also, another neat mechanic here, kind of like Ranger, they can have a percentage build-up where they'll have an auto-cast ability with certain gems. Once they do reach 100%, it will then proc. They also have the max amount of active skills here, or at least seemingly so, which is 25 active elemental skills. Now really cool here, they actually did showcase off a build for the Ball Lightning. Again, kind of like Diablo's Ball Lightning, but this one's a bit different. It basically covers your entire screen with lightning balls. Really cool there, you'll see the combination of abilities and gems they did take here. Just figured I'd showcase that because it's one of the only builds we have showcased so far. Now of course, just like Witch, their main attribute is intelligence. Now, as of right now, from what we know, the difficulty of Sorceress is a little bit uncertain. Normally, it's known for being less difficult, but it might actually take some complexity this time around. We'll have to wait and see. For their lore, they are a master of arcane magic, seeking ancient knowledge and ultimate magic power. They're known for uncovering mysteries of magic in the game's darker themes. And of course, just like all the other classes, they do have two ascendancies. The first one here being Stormweaver. That is known for being a master of the elements, where you will have higher criticals and damage overall. Nothing too significant there, mostly just buffing your already known abilities. However, Chronomancer does have some specific stuff that is unique to it. They literally can freeze time. They'll have many different time manipulation abilities, which do include teleportation, mana, and CD resets, where upon teleporting it will engage that mechanic. So some really cool unique abilities there. That does cover it for all the classes and the different ascendancies. Hopefully I broke that down to you as much as possible, why to pick them and what they can do. If you're curious on which class I might play, more than likely it's going to be a witch or a sorceress. We'll have to wait and see on that. I'm still not sure on the ascendancies. Overall, that's about cover for today's video. If you enjoyed it, like, subscribe. Until the next dose.